Welcome, church leaders, to this time to look into how to protect your church from the threats that are out there right now facing America. To help us do this, we have with us right now one of our attorneys for the Pacific Justice Institute, Attorney Ronald Hackenberg. Ronald, why are you a particular expert in this area of church security?
Thank you, Brad. I have been in law enforcement for 35 years before I became an attorney. I was a police officer and was the former director of criminal investigations statewide for the Pennsylvania State Police. In 2007, I became a chief of police at a public university in California. And 3 weeks later, we had the tragic shooting at Virginia Tech. So from that point forward in my law enforcement career, I had a real emphasis on preparing for an active shooter incident. And then, Brad, after retirement, I went to work for an excellent company that sent me around the United States doing 2-day active shooter preparedness seminars for churches, schools, businesses, what have you.
Okay, so you've got tremendous credentials in this regard. What's the problem? What is the problem churches are facing today with regards to security?
You know, for most of our nation's history, law enforcement officers, they locked their weapons in their vehicles before they went into church, and families sat together watching the pastor worshiping and absorbing the message without giving a thought to the safety of them and their families as they sit with their backs to the door. Well, that all changed. In 1980, we had our first mass shooting at a church, and then it really accelerated in the 2000s. Now there are estimates that there are about 480 serious incidents of violence in churches each year. So we're in a position now, there are numerous examples of mass shootings at churches, and we're in a position now where we have to take action to prevent this and to ensure the safety of our congregants.
That's clearly a trend we can't ignore. But what do you say to a pastor or someone in a church that says, hey, we're trusting in God. We don't need a security team?
You know, when you're in doubt, I think you should always look to the words of Jesus. And I believe he addressed this. When you look in Luke chapter 10, Jesus sends out the 70 2 by 2. And he basically tells them that God will provide everything for them. He says, for example, I send you out as lambs among wolves. Carry neither money bag, knapsack, nor sandals, and greet no one along the road. And then later, we come to Luke 22, and Jesus is sending out the disciples. His message is a little different. He said to them, when I send you out without money bag, knapsack, and sandals, did you lack anything? They said nothing. And then he said, but now, Jesus said, he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack. And he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. So they said, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. So we believe that what Jesus is saying and what God's word is saying, that there are times when the Lord protects us, but there are other times that we're expected to protect ourselves and those we're responsible for. In Jeremiah 3:15, God says he'll send shepherds to feed you with knowledge and wisdom. Those are pastors. And as a shepherd, one of the main duties of a shepherd is to guard the flock. And we believe that it's incumbent upon pastors to take steps to guard their flocks.
Well said. Why should security, though, be an actual ministry of a church?
You know, it's very important that everybody works together in this. What we recommend is that anyone who has contact, whose responsibility it is to have contact with people coming to your church, be a part of the security team. There's going to be armed security, then there's going to be unarmed security, but they have to work together. They have to mesh together as a unit. We're talking ushers, we're talking greeters, we're talking parking lot attendants. Their training is so important because we want to identify any particular issues or problems far away from the church itself and keep that danger away from the church, address it early. Whether that be people getting out signs for some kind of a protest, or all dressed people you don't know all dressed in the same type of shirt or uniform to do a protest, or maybe that's someone actually taking a weapon out of a vehicle, or maybe it's someone who's in obvious distress. We want the team to work together, communicate, make sure people are aware of threats, and stop them before they get to the house of the Lord.
So how does a pastor actually get started and choose a security team?
I think it's incumbent first to appoint a security director. Ideally, this should be somebody with a law enforcement background. And hopefully somebody was in some sort of supervisory or management position, somebody who's comfortable with the tactical things that will be involved, but also with policy leadership abilities, um, and someone that is well known to the congregation. Hopefully someone who is still in contact with your local police department that can exchange information going forward. And once that security director is in place, then the pastor and the church board can work with the security director to start selecting team members.
Okay, well, how do they conduct a risk assessment or a security survey? How's that actually conducted?
Okay? There are a number of ways that you can get this accomplished. Um, they go by many names. It could be a vulnerability assessment, security survey, a risk audit. They call them all sorts of things. But the idea is take a close look at your facility, identify areas where you have vulnerabilities, and correct them if possible. And you may find places where technology will help, whether it's video surveillance or what have you. You might also find an area that's very secure, a place that you could safely secure people in a violent incident until the police respond. Now, if you have the budget for it, there are people that with a lot of expertise in doing these surveys. But if you don't have that kind of budget, there are also forms and checklists that are available online. There are your local police department may help. And one place that's really helpful for a security survey or one of these audits is to look towards your local emergency manager, whether that's on the city, county, or what have you level. They're used to doing these assessments for all hazards, not just active shooter, and they can be very helpful. Your insurance carrier may also be able to help, and your insurance carrier should always be involved in setting up your security team.
So how do they do the training that's needed for this?
Training is perhaps the most critical part of this because we are training people who may have to use deadly force, and you can't have too much training in that regard. And there are a number, if I could, let me go through a number of different types of training that you should have. First of all is tactical training for your armed personnel. Now, we're going to talk going out to the firing range is good. The tactical training basically is how to perform when someone may or actually is shooting back at you. So with tactical training issues, you have to be wary of things like getting involved in crossfire situations, avoiding what we call shooting in depth, where you're shooting and there are other team members in front of you that can actually be hit in friendly fire type of incidents. These things unfortunately happen. So the way that we get this type of training, if you don't have the budget to bring someone in and do it, talk to your local police department. Generally in the county, in the area, there will be a SWAT team, special weapons and tactics. See if you can get those SWAT team members to work with your people to do those things. How to handle a weapon up until the point where you have to use deadly force, not having your finger in the trigger, how to move properly with these weapons. The tactical training is extremely important. Now, we talked about periodic firing, just doing regular range training so that you're accurate. When you pull the trigger, if you have to, Lord forbid that you have to use deadly force, but if you do, we want to make sure that you're going to hit what you are aiming at. So the regular training with the firearm is also important. For all of your personnel, they should be trained on how to spot distressed individuals and how to de-escalate people who are very anxious and very excited when they show up at your church. Everybody, this is both armed and unarmed, should have that training. They should also be taught how to properly restrain someone if we have to. We always want to wait for the police to arrive to make arrests if we can do it. But sometimes they're going to force your hand, and you'll have to take steps to secure these people before the police get there. Communications is important. We need to train them in that also. Use plain English. Don't use 10 codes or any other kind of codes. And the reason is when you have other people involved that aren't normally there, it's very easy to miscommunicate. And then one exception to that is we like to have a code. If you're a parking lot attendant or a greeter and you have someone that you're concerned with And it's not to the point where you need somebody to run and you've got some kind of a problem, but you see something developing. We like to use a code word. Maybe pick out a name that's not common at your church. Maybe it's Gertrude, and you just say, "Hey, would you ask the pastor if he could see Gertrude?" Or Gertrude's trying to find a pastor. Or anytime you hear that name, the other team members know, okay, this person needs us to kind of gather around, safety in numbers, that we have a potential situation there. And with any security team, you need to be doing things like scenario training, classroom training, tabletop exercises. All those kind of things are very important. The last couple of things are important for your church staff and your congregation. And if you can, you should get them training as well. This is very important. When you train your congregation or your staff on active shooter preparedness training for your staff and for your congregation is extremely important. Now, we know by active shooters, some people will call them active killers. These are people that are coming into your church or a school or a mall, and they're basically trying to kill as many people as they can kill. And what this amazing statistics are on this, if you take a look at this graphic that we have up here now, we're going to take a look at the shooting statistics for police officers versus active shooters. Now, Brad, as you know, other than our beloved military, police officers are the most tactically trained people with firearms in our society. They're good at what they do. They know how to use firearms. Active shooters generally are not. They're very poorly trained tactically. They may shoot at targets, but when they go out to kill people, they have nowhere near the training of the police. But as you can see from this graphic, police officers are only hitting 10 to 20% of the people that they shoot at. And of those people, they are only killing 10% of the people that they hit. Now, active shooters, in contrast, they're hitting a way higher group of people. They're hitting 70% of their targets. And the fatal hits, they're killing 50% of the people that they shoot. These numbers are way out of whack. And the question is, why is that? Well, when a police officer draws his or her gun and they use deadly force, they're doing it because their life is threatened. Somebody's shooting at them or maybe shooting at them. So they're moving, they're engaging with this person tactically, and it makes it much more difficult to shoot accurately than what we have with active shooters. And what this training that you have for the congregation and for the staff does is try to do away with what they've been conditioned to do during K-12 school and college. If you went to K-12 school in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, you've been taught to shelter in place, to lock the door, and to wait in your room. And when the shooter comes in, when the bad guy comes in to kill as many as he can, people are hunkered under their desks. They're sitting at their desks with their head down, and the shooter is able to go up and just shoot these people in the back of the head. And that's why their shooting is so accurate, and that's why they're having so many fatalities. In the United States, if you are shot, and this is something that we really bring out in the training, if you get shot, there's a 90% chance that you will survive that shooting if you get prompt medical attention. So keep moving, keep fighting, do whatever you're doing if you get shot. But if you get shot in the back of the head, that number reduces to 6%. Those are almost always fatal. So what this training teaches them is, don't just sit there and let this person walk in and shoot you in the back of the head. Get moving, do things to distract that shooter, whether it's throwing, attacking, or do whatever. Make that shooter actually do like police officers do and have to engage with something other than just a static target. So just moving, in fact, can reduce your chances of being shot by 90%. So basically, that's what this training does. People will leave there, they'll take this training with them to wherever they go, and they will have a much better chance of surviving an active shooter incident than they would have before they would ever take this type of training. So if you can do it, get a professional in to train your congregation and your staff.
What about evacuation drills? How are those conducted?
Right, that's a very important point. You know, everybody thinks that evacuation is very simple. You just get up and you run out the door. But that's not the case. If somebody's outside with a weapon, maybe they didn't fire that weapon, but the church is secure and they can't get in. You don't want your people running outside of the church and making themselves vulnerable. So you're going to be trusting on that security team to be giving instructions on what to do, when to evacuate, how to evacuate. When you evacuate for an active shooter, it's much different than evacuating for a fire. When you evacuate to a fire, you generally go to an assembly point, get together there, and so people can take roll and make sure everyone's out and what have you. In an active shooter situation, you just want to put distance between yourself and the shooter. When you exit that church, don't go to your cars. Just run as far and as fast as you can away from the church. So there's a lot to evacuation training for your congregation and staff.
What about access control? What can you tell the audience about that?
Access control is critical. Once church is started, many times these incidents happen with late arriving people. We recommend that after church starts, maybe 10 minutes or so, secure the doors. If it's a small church, have just one place that you come in for services. But if it's bigger, just treat every entrance the same way. You need to have an attendant there. You need a door locked. If one of your congregants is late coming to the church, fine, let them in. But if somebody looks like they're a problem, alert the rest of the team members and make sure that that problem stays outside of your doors.
What about disruptors who actually come to the church? What should you do? How should people be trained to deal with that?
We have questions sometimes about the free speech rights of protesters, people that if they get past our defenses and come into our church, either one person or a group, and they're trying to disrupt the services. One thing that you need to know as a security team is the First Amendment rights in this case is not the freedom of speech of the protester. The First Amendment rights belong to the church and their free exercise of religion. In 1994, Congress passed the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrance Act, or the FACE Act, and this has specific protection for churches. So federal law says that you do not have a right to disrupt the church service for any reason, regardless of what you may think is your First Amendment freedom of speech. Another typical problem we have with churches is dealing with trespassers. The church can withdraw its permission for any of its attendees to be there. If someone starts to act up, even though they were welcomed in, the church can say you are no longer welcome, you need to leave. If they don't leave, they are a trespasser and they can be charged as such. And then sometimes we have your repeat people that maybe your security team has had to remove on a number of occasions. If that happens, we recommend sending a certified letter to that person, telling them not to come back. If they ignore that, then get a restraining order from the court against that person.
Yeah. Well, Ronald, thank you so much for that very valuable information. I want to encourage people, if they want more information on how they can provide greater security for their church and to protect the people attending church services, go to our website, pji.org, and there you'll find a valuable resource on church security, how to protect your church. In addition, if you'd like the Pacific Justice Institute to do a Zoom call with questions and answers for a particular denomination or a conference, feel free to contact our office through our website, pji.org. Now's not the time to be reckless. Now's the time for us to be wise and discerning and to be prepared. Ronald Hackenberg, thank you again for your fine work in helping churches be secure.